Hey everyone, as always, thanks for coming to check out the video today. So at work, my day job, I take a lot of notes. My short-term memory is shot, so I have to write down things. So recently they got us some Rite in the Rain notebooks, and it's a great little notebook if you've ever seen one. Basically it's waterproof. You have to use the pen that they sell as well, but it's a pretty cool notebook. Anyways, I wanted to make a cover for mine just because I like having the covers. I can easily identify it. I like having the cover. So I thought I'd make a video on how I make the cover. First thing, I am not a professional sewer. It's something I enjoy doing. It's a hobby, and so yeah, keep that in mind while you're watching the video. And yeah, hopefully you like the video, and yeah, I'll show you how I do it. All right, so for materials that I'm using this again. This is 1000D cordura. It's a bit overkill for a simple book cover, but it's what I have on hand, and it's great fabric. I get all my fabrics from rockywoodfabrics.com, and the thread that I'll be using for this is bonded nylon thread, and this is just an example. I'm using a brown or tan thread for this project today. Then I'm using a 1-inch webbing, and I'm using 1-inch edging and some tan Velcro. And as far as the machine that I'll be using, this is a Consew 206 RB. It's a heavy-duty commercial sewing machine. I started with an older antique sewing machine when I got into sewing. It works great. I got it on Craigslist for $100, so if this is something new to you, you can get an older, heavy metal antique sewing machine. There's a lot of strength behind them, and they work pretty well for cordura and fabric, like cordura and canvas like material. Alright, so here is the Rite in the Rain notebook, just a close-up of the book that I'm going to be making a cover for today. And for my notebooks, anytime I make these covers, I like to put Kydex on both the covers, so I'll cut 2 pieces of Kydex the same size as the cover, and I'll also cut a third piece about the same size as the binder on the book. To cut Kydex, all you have to do is basically cut a line in it with a razor blade, and then you basically just bend the Kydex and it will pop the rest of the way. Very easy to work with. You can see that my covers aren't exact. You can see the rough on the edges. The reason why is because when you put the pieces inside the cover, you shouldn't see them, so it's okay if they're not perfect. Again, you just cut them with a razor blade and they will pop to the size that you want. And here you can see that I am cutting the binder, the size for the binder of the book. For the pieces that you cut that are smaller, if you just take a pair of pliers and bend those pieces, it makes it easier to pop off. And then again, I just cut it the same size as the length of the book. So now I have all 3 pieces. I'm going to go ahead and set those to the side. Next, I'm going to get out my cordura fabric. This is 1000 denier cordura fabric. This is it's pretty much overkill for this book. 500D would work perfect. But this is what I have on hand, so this is what I'm going to use. So next I'm going to kind of get some rough estimates of the measurements that I need. For these projects, I always use a little more fabric than I need to start with. It's a little bit wasteful, but it saves me time in the long run because it's always easier to cut fabric off than it is to basically restart the whole project, because you can't usually add more fabric without making some lines that don't look right. So anyways, I'm going to start with a piece that's basically 11 by 13, and I'm going to actually cut 3 more pieces so I can put this rather large roll of fabric that I have back up. To cut these pieces, I like to use a self-healing mat. So I'm going to go ahead and cut my 3 pieces. I'm going to cut 11 by 13, and each piece kind of has a purpose. One of the pieces I'll cut into smaller pieces, and I'll show you that in just a minute. But again, this just makes it easier to manage when you have the smaller pieces. Alright, next I'm going to put the book down and the Kydex down, and I'm just going to kind of get an outline of everything that I'm making here. So I'm going to put all 3 pieces down, and I'm going to just, with chalk, I'm going to just draw a quick shape of the size that I want. Again, it's not exact, it's not perfect, but it does everything that I needed to do. Now you can see that I have the shape that I want. I've got some excess fabric on the edges, and I've still got my 2 other pieces that have a purpose in the next few steps. So when I'm done with this, what I want is the covers of the Rite and the Rain book to basically slide into these pockets on the cover of the book itself. So this is what it'll look like when we're finished. I also want to be able to add a pin, and here's what the pockets for the pin will look like when that's finished as well. Next, I'm going to go ahead and take the book, and I'm going to lay it on top of our fabric, and I'm going to take the next piece of fabric and lay it on top of basically the inside covering to get an idea of what the pockets are going to look like. I'm also going to take another piece of fabric and kind of get an idea of what the pin pockets will look like, and this will kind of tell me what size I need to cut for each piece. To start with, we're going to sew the pin pocket on first, and then we're going to sew the pocket for the covering on next. So once you get all these pieces cut and ready, this is kind of what it's going to look like. I highly recommend constantly checking your pieces and basically just seeing how they're going to fit before you sew them on. For these pockets, I am going to actually sew 3 lines so the cover can slide in like so. But before I sew those in, I need to sew on the pin pocket, because if I sew the cover pockets on first, I won't be able to actually sew on the pin pockets without sewing through all the fabric, and I don't want that. This is kind of what it's going to look like when the pin pocket is sewn into the cover pocket, and here you can see what it's going to look like once they are put together. Alright, so you're going to want to put an edge on your fabric. Some people just simply roll the fabric and will sew across here like that to make the edge. I actually prefer to use edging, and this is what my edging that I use looks like. So the way I do my edging, it's not real scientific. I just cut a little bit more edging than the length of the fabric, and I will fold it in half, and I'll sew it on like that. This is the edging that I prefer, and it just takes a simple line across to put this together. So again, I'll just cut just a little bit more than I need, and I like to go ahead and do it for all the pieces that I'm cutting in the steps. So I'll go ahead and cut my second piece of edging, and now I will get it ready to basically to sew on both pieces at my sewing machine. The way I like to basically prep my edging is I take these clamshell clamps that are usually meant for like office supplies. These are quick and easy. You can use pins, but again, I like to use these. So as I said before, I will basically just take the edging and fold it in half, so it's equal on both sides of the fabric that we're sewing it onto. I will clamp it down. I'll make sure it's tight. And I'll clamp more sides to it. I'll go ahead and do this now for the second piece. Okay, and here are both pieces with the edging put on, and they are now ready to be sewn onto the pockets of the Rite in the Rain cover. One thing I want to point out, as you can see, the back side of this is more dull than the other side, and just to make sure that you're paying attention if you have a preference on whether or not you want the dull colors on the outside or the inside. So now we will go ahead and get ready to sew these onto the next pieces, and we'll go ahead and cover that. Alright, this part is a pretty simple part of the process. All we're going to do is just basically sew 3 lines onto this to connect the pocket, and then we're going to sew some additional lines to divide the pins on one of them. Like I said, we're just going to go ahead and sew these 3 lines on here to connect the pin pocket to basically the cover pocket. And again, you want to make sure that you don't sew over a line over the edging that you just sewed together, because then it'll close it up and you won't be able to put anything inside of it. Now I'm going to go ahead and sew my first line for the pin, and what each of these lines do is it's just going to divide up the pocket so that if you put a pin in it, it neatly stays in one position. Alright, now we have our pin pockets and our other pocket sewn to our cover pockets, and so we're going to go ahead and lay those back on our fabric that we drew our outline on, just to kind of see what it looks like. And two, we're also going to go ahead and slide the cover of the book. We're going to slide the inside and outside cover of the book underneath each of these flaps, just to kind of get a reference on where we're at this point. Next, we're going to sew our 3 lines, but before we do that, we're going to add edging on the open portion of the pocket so we can, again, just to give it those clean lines. So just like before, I'm going to cut some of my edging just a little bit longer than the piece of fabric that I'm working with. And then I'm going to go ahead and cut the second one. And now I'm going to go ahead and prepare it for the sewing machine by putting the clamps on the edge of the fabric. Now we are ready to go back to the sewing machine. On a lot of my stitching, you'll see that I start about an inch past where the fabric begins, and then I actually go backwards and then go back the normal way again. That's called a double stitch, and that's basically just to lock the thread in place and to keep it from coming back out. Alright, next we're going to go ahead and sew on our cover pockets onto our main piece of fabric. And again, 3 lines on each side, and we don't want to sew the line that has the edging on it. Alright, so now at this point we have our our pocket covers sewn onto our main piece of fabric, and the book is ready to go in there. But one thing I want to point out is you might have noticed during the video that I kind of readjusted where I had some of my lines drawn. As I said earlier in the video, I like to use excess fabric because it's easier to get rid of fabric than it is to try to add fabric. So again, that's why I like to use the excess fabric. So at this point I can go ahead and cut the excess fabric. So I'm going to cut these edges up, and I could call it done and just have the dull outside. But going back to the Kydex that I cut, I still want to insert that. So I'm going to add another piece to this, and basically I'm going to sandwich the Kydex pieces in between. So what that'll look like is this Kydex piece will go in between this, and it'll make the book a little more rigid. And to get started with that, I'm basically going to sew pockets for the Kydex pieces to fit inside of. So to get started on this, I'm basically going to sew a line here, I'm going to sew a line here, I'm going to sew a line here, and then I'm going to sew a line on either side of the pocket itself. And that way I'll have a place for the index binder piece of Kydex to fit, and I'll have a place for the two large pieces of Kydex to fit. And then once those are in, I'll sew another pocket, basically locking those inside. Okay, so we've got the first line sewn for the Kydex pieces, but before we go farther, we're actually going to go ahead and add a strap to the book to keep it closed when we're not using it. So we've got this inside piece, and now we've got an outside piece. And basically what will happen is we're going to sew a piece of Velcro onto this outside piece, and then on the other side we're going to sew a strap so we can close it. And that way when we're not using the book, it's secure. And again, these are just going to be sewn into this outside piece and not all the way through. So we have a 1-inch webbing right here and hook and loop Velcro, and of course it's all tan and brown to match the Multicam. Before I get started on adding the Velcro and the strap, I'm going to go ahead and cut off the excess fabric so I can get the size right. So what I like to do is cut just about 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 inch past what I've already got to what I'm actually using. When everything is sewn together, the edging will cover up what I've left over. It'll leave a nice edge, and it'll look good. So I'm going to go ahead and cut off the edges. And now we're ready to go ahead and sew on the Velcro. Alright, so right now I've just got the fuzzy side of the Velcro sitting on top of the fabric, and I'm going to go ahead and just get a measurement. I've got it about in the middle, and right here I've got it in between 4 and 5 inches. So I'm just going to go ahead and lay the ruler across, and I'm going to take my chalk and I'm going to draw lines across to make sure that I have the strap and the piece of Velcro in the same place. Alright, it's very important when you sew this that you don't sew through all the pieces. So you just want to sew through this outside piece. So I'm going to start with sewing my Velcro piece on. You can see it's in between my lines here. I'm going to go ahead and adjust my string. And I'm going to get started sewing this piece to what is the front of the cover itself. Next, I'm going to sew this webbing in between my two lines, and again, just take the machine and get it sewn in. Alright, one thing when you sew this outside edge for your webbing, you still want to make sure to give yourself enough room for the edging. So basically what that means is you just don't want to get right against the edge of your webbing strap. Alright, so at this point we are almost done. All we need to do now is to sew in the final line for the Kydex and to put the edging on the book and to sew on the final piece of Velcro, and we'll be done. Alright, now that we have the Kydex in, we're going to sew a final line across here just to lock it in place, and then we're going to get rid of this excess fabric. But before we get rid of the excess fabric, I'm going to go ahead and cut all the edging. And again, I need it just a little bit longer than the length of the fabric, so it's okay that we are getting ready to get rid of some fabric. And now I'm going to go ahead and cut some of the Velcro that I need and just get it ready to sew onto the strap. And back at the sewing machine, I'm going to go ahead and sew this line up to lock the Kydex in place. And now back at the cutting mat, I'm going to go ahead and cut off the excess piece. And now I will go ahead and start clamping on the edging to get it ready to get sewn on. Once I have two of the pieces clamped on, I'm going to go ahead and sew those on because I need to sew the next two pieces on top of the pieces that we're sewing on right now. One of the things I'm being careful about right now is to not sew into the Kydex itself. I just want to sew into the fabric. I don't want my needle hitting the plastic. Now I'm going to cut the excess edges, and then I'm going to burn the edges just to kind of seal them. I'd be very careful when you do this. Make sure you don't burn yourself. And then we're going to go ahead and clamp on the next two pieces. Now we'll sew the final two pieces of edging on top of the previous two pieces of edging. Next, before I sew on the final piece of Velcro onto the strap, I'm going to sew a loop in the end. And basically what the loop is for, it's just something extra to grab onto when you go to open the cover. It just makes it easier to open. Now I will cut the final pieces of excess edging, and just like before, I'm going to singe the edges. I'm going to make sure not to burn myself. And that's it. Next, we'll go ahead and insert the notebook into the cover itself. It should be tight to get in there. That just means that you've gotten it, the tolerance is tight, which is what you want. And there it is. You can see our strap holds the book shut, and this turned out pretty well. I'm pretty happy with how everything fits. You can see it's rigid. There's no protruding edges. This turned out, again, pretty well. And you can see there's a place for a pen. It's a little bulkier than I wanted, but it still holds the pen. I think if I was to redo this, I would actually put the pen pocket on the outside cover, but it still works on the inside as well. If you have any questions on how I did any of the steps, if I didn't make something understandable, just ask down below and I'll do my best to answer any questions. And my next sewing project, I'm actually going to make some shooting bags that you take to the range. And so that's next. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video and thanks for watching.